Well, welcome back to the Intersect. Today, we are so excited to be tackling this really tough subject of what if I can't afford to be in that 2% of people who use fertility awareness to get pregnant? What if, my reasons are life-threatening or threatening to my family and so on. And so we are so excited to be sitting down today with Louise Boychuck. Louise is a registered nurse and Marquette method instructor who lives in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. So we are international today. She is the director of Vitae Fertility Education, a collective of Marquette instructors who teach the method virtually and in person. She's passionate about teaching couples about the science and research behind NFP in an approachable and easy to understand way. So Louise, welcome. We are so excited to have you here today.
Thanks. I'm happy to be here.
So a little nerd out on my end. I discovered Louise's articles on NFP method effectiveness a while back, and I have used them multiple times. And so Louise, you actually reached out to us with this topic suggestion, and I fangirled a little bit. So I was so excited to have you on and so excited to talk about this topic in particular with you, because I know that this is the source of a lot of fear. So let's just dive right in.
Sure.
Okay. So you shared with us as we were preparing for this episode that you and your husband were absolutely in this category at one point in your life of we cannot afford to be the 2% that gets pregnant. And you have so much scientific knowledge that we'll get into shortly, but I'd like for you to share with our audience how you understand the seriousness of this from your own story and how that prompted you to ultimately become a Marquette instructor.
Okay, we'll jump right in. This is so vulnerable for me. That's okay. So I'll tell you my NFP story. We have, throughout our marriage, been in that category of we just can't have a baby right now. We can't have another baby right now. We can't have another baby right now. And still right now we are in that category. So it's very real in my life. So we'll tell you the story of the Boychucks. So I'm married. I've been married for 9 years. And when my husband and I got married, we started doing Billings, which is a mucus method. And it didn't work very well for us. And I think part of the reason it didn't work well for us was because I am a nurse. And so I was doing shift work and what is really the end of day when you're working nights and days and it's all mixed up and you stay for a 16-hour shift, it gets really confusing. So when we got married, we thought, okay, we're going to wait a little while before we have kids. And then we found out we were pregnant with Ethan. So that was a little bit of a surprise, but we had Ethan. And then after I had Ethan, I was breastfeeding. When I was breastfeeding, I had constant peak type mucus, which is really hard when you're doing a mucus method. So we had worked with our instructor and she helped us find our basic infertile pattern, but we just felt like we can't get this wrong because we have a little baby in our house. So we decided to just abstain until my cycles came back. So we abstained for 6 months. And then when my cycles came back, we thought, okay, well, I'm ovulating, so we can figure this out. So we tracked a mucus buildup and we tracked a mucus dry up and we waited the right number of days. And then we got pregnant with Gabe. So Gabe was a very big surprise to us. We had abstained for half a year. We had followed the really conservative options and it just still wasn't working for us. So when we were pregnant with Gabe, we thought, okay, we can't keep having a baby every 18 months until I turned 50. We'd have 18 kids. That's not the plan. And so we started asking our friends who weren't having babies how they were doing that. And they were all using Marquette. So that's how we found out about Marquette. That was about 7 years ago. At that time, the instructions were just available for free online. So we self-taught Marquette, which is not a good option. And we were so close to doing it properly, but not quite. And we ended up pregnant again with another surprise pregnancy. So that was our third pregnancy in 3 years. That pregnancy resulted in a miscarriage at 18 weeks. And then shortly after that, we decided we were ready to have another baby. So we got pregnant with Nora. So in our first 4 years of marriage, we had 4 pregnancies, only one of which was planned. That was Nora at the very end. My husband and I were looking back after Nora was born and we're yeah, we actually got pregnant every single time we ovulated. So that's really bad luck. And so it's not sustainable. So when I was pregnant with Nora, I decided to just become a Marquette instructor. You have to be a doctor or a nurse to be a Marquette instructor. I was already a nurse and we just desperately needed to know how to not have any more babies. And so I started doing the training really selfishly. And then as I was doing the training, people started reaching out to learn the method and I decided to actually teach Marquette. So that's our NFP story. We've been doing Marquette properly for 5 years since Nora was born. We haven't had any babies since then. So that's like a record breaker for the Boychucks. It's been really good for us.
Thank God. That was a long time coming, huh?
It was a wild
To
ride.
be able to successfully avoid a pregnancy. I think somebody or many people from the outside looking in, before you found Marquette at least, would be like, well, why don't you just switch to birth control?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I think that's probably a question that could be on a lot of people's minds. And not too long ago, I realized that no matter what method we use to plan our families, whether it's birth control or some method of fertility awareness, there's always something we have to give up. So it's just a matter of what we're willing to give up. Fertility awareness is equally as effective as birth control at preventing pregnancy, but the cost, not financial, but what we're willing to give up is different between the two options. So we pay for birth control by depleting our health and by losing the ability to read our body. Fertility awareness is a lifestyle change that we pay for with our time, effort, and many times a significant amount of abstinence, which is hard for a lot of people to talk about. So now the big question is, what does staying out of that 2% category look like on a practical level for someone using fertility awareness? Are there extra protocols to implement? Does it just come down to a mindset change? And finally, how does abstinence play into all this?
That's a good
Good luck.
question. Yeah, thank you.
We just threw it all at you.
So I think first you need to get to the root of the problem. So what is the reason for this couple's need to avoid pregnancy? Is it that they've struggled with a specific NFP method and they've had lots of surprise pregnancies like the Boychucks? Or is it that she has a heart valve condition and if she gets pregnant, she'll go into heart failure and she'll die? So the way that you would, as an instructor, the way that you would address those that the NFP journey for that couple will differ depending on where they're coming from. If they've struggled with NFP before and they've just had a lot of surprises and they never really felt confident in their NFP method, sometimes it's just a matter of figuring out, okay, what happened last time and how can we make sure that doesn't happen this time? If they found mucus really confusing, maybe they want to add in temperatures, or maybe they want to start tracking with the Clear Blue monitor and have a more objective perspective. And sometimes it's really simple enough. It's a simple enough fix for the couple where they just need that clarity and then they're fine. They're in the perfect use category. If they have really serious reasons, really life or death serious reasons for avoiding pregnancy, we don't just play around with it and see what happens. We jump right to the most conservative, starting them abstaining right at the beginning of their cycle and adding in double checks and triple checks and progesterone blood draws to make sure that before they start having sex, they really have ovulated and they're really not in the fertile time anymore. It's a big spectrum. And so finding where the couple falls in that spectrum is a really important part of helping them decide what is the best way forward for us right now. And that can be reassessed as they get more comfortable with the method, or maybe as their kids get older and they're like, okay, we would be okay now if we had another baby. We can live with a 2% chance of pregnancy, so they can maybe start to follow the basic rules of the method again. What was the other part of the question?
Oh, yeah. I wanted you to talk a little bit more about abstinence too. When we had our little meeting the other day, we talked about being a mindset change. You said it was a little bit of both. And I thought that was really interesting because there does seem to be a spectrum of how serious a couple is about avoiding pregnancy, and we could talk about maybe they take a little more, a few more chances. And you said if you're being really conservative, you can start testing at the beginning of the cycle. I know also, at least with Creighton, or a lot of NAPRA doctors are probably mainstream doctors too, could do a progesterone blood level draw. And some couples choose to use post-peak or, the luteal phase only to have intercourse if they really want to avoid pregnancy. Anything you want to add to that whole concept of that mindset?
Yeah. So with the spectrum, so we have two ends of the spectrum. We have sex anytime you want and a really, really high chance of pregnancy, or 100% abstinence and a 0% chance of pregnancy. Nobody wants to be in the 100% abstinence category. Some people end up there for whatever reason, but it's not a long-term solution. And so every couple has to have this conversation. Sometimes the NFP instructor is a part of it, and sometimes they're not, of like, where are we on this spectrum? So most NFP methods, when you look at their effectiveness rate, they're like somewhere around like 98, 99% effective with perfect use. So if the couple can commit to following the rules of the method, then they stand about like a 2% chance of pregnancy. Most couples feel totally comfortable with that because that's also how effective the pill is. That's how effective condoms are with perfect use. The world says a 2% chance of pregnancy is like relatively low. Some couples, that feels like a really high chance of pregnancy to them, whether they've been a part of that 2% before or whether they just like can't afford to be a part of that 2%. And so then they need to decide what are we willing to sacrifice in order to get closer to that 100% effective. Some couples will choose abstinence from the very beginning of their cycle. I've followed a lot of couples through their Marquette journey, and I've found some really interesting things. This is probably not news to a Creighton instructor, but this might be news to people listening to the podcast. So most of the surprise pregnancies that happen, regardless of the NFP method, they happen in the pre-ovulatory phase. And so whether you knew you were in the pre-ovulatory phase or not, generally a baby comes from having sex before ovulation or on the day of ovulation. And so some couples and some instructors will recommend just like make your pre-ovulatory phase unavailable or very few days available at the beginning of the pre-ovulatory phase. And that'll significantly decrease your risk of a pregnancy. So the numbers that I'm going to say are not published research. This is just based on kind of what I've seen happen in my clients. But with Marquette in regular cycles, once you're established in regular cycles, you can start to kind of give a little bit of wiggle room at the beginning of the cycle, depending on when your peak has happened in your previous cycles. So for the couples that are following the normal Marquette rules, this is published with perfect use, it's 98.4% effective. So that means there's a 1.6% chance of pregnancy. What I've found in my couples is that if the couple starts abstaining on day 6 of their cycle, which is a more conservative approach than Marquette regular cycles couples would generally adhere to, then there's only about a 0.5% chance of pregnancy, so 99.5% effective. If the couple starts abstaining at the very beginning of their cycle, day 1, and they abstain all the way through their post-peak count, it's closer to like a 0.003% chance of pregnancy, maybe even lower than that. I haven't done that calculation in a while, but it's a really, really low chance of pregnancy. But you'll notice it's not a 0% chance of pregnancy. We have seen pregnancies happen after peak. And it's like a little bit of a question as to, for those couples, was it like a bad test? Like, did the monitor give them a false peak, or did their body just like take its sweet time in ovulating and the egg was still viable for pregnancy when they had sex? It's really hard to say what happened, but important to know that like no matter what you do, there's always a small chance of pregnancy. But for the couples who really, really need to avoid pregnancy, we would recommend tracking with the monitor, or tracking mucus if they're doing Creighton or Billings, but also adding in a progesterone blood draw or a family planning draw once they presume that they've ovulated, just to confirm, yeah, your progesterone levels are high. The only way that your progesterone levels will be high is if you're taking progesterone, which then your doctor would say, don't do a progesterone blood draw, or if you've ovulated, because progesterone is released by the follicle as it dissolves after ovulation has happened.
Yeah. And just kind of building off of the abstinence, and you kind of touched on this in your story a little bit. I think probably the biggest issue with the abstinence for this, which is part of the mindset component, is that you put in all of this work, all of this effort, you forego all of this sex, and like your chance is still there. Right. And so it's like, on a certain level, again, we're talking about like cost benefit. It's like, okay, well, birth control like kills my libido and like causes blood clots and like shuts down a very important system of my body. But I get to have sex whenever one of us wants, even if it's not me. It's like, it's that mindset of, we think that we kind of have it programmed that in order for sex to be good, in order for a marriage to be healthy, you've heard these stats, like you need to be having sex 3 times a week. That's what's normal. And it's like, it's common, but it's not your normal, because, we've so stereotyped our expectations of sex that when we get married or, we're in relationships and like sex is a factor, it's like we take those stereotypes instead of learning the person, instead of learning and loving a unique individual with all that comes with that, like all of the health concerns, all of the financial concerns. Like, I'm going to respect you as an individual, and I'm going to try, and I realize that's going to be tough, and that I'm going to have to make sacrifices, including in the sexual realm. And it's like most of us, like, it doesn't even compute, because even I know, like, talking within Christian circles, like with purity culture, purity culture is just like women exist for the sexual gratification of men. Like that is the narrative. And it's like, no, no. So I think one of the things that is forcing us, this topic is forcing us to grapple with, is the reality that one of the purposes of sex is to make babies.
Yeah.
Like it or not, that is one of the primary purposes of sex. Like, we make babies with this. Obviously not every time. And, like, obviously if you have like serious health issues, nobody's asking you to not get married because you're not ready to have a baby. But just understand that having sex, no matter what you're doing, there's like this possibility, like that's part of what it's for. And I think that is just kind of so against the way that we think about it. And so it's difficult to grapple with this, because it's like, well, I should be able to have sex whenever I want. It's like, name me one other topic, food, exercise, work, where it's just, this is my life and this is all I think about and this is all I do. And if I can't have it, well, that's not okay. But suddenly when it comes to sex, it's different. And, I think we just kind of have to start asking ourselves the question of why does this have a different set of standards? Anyway, that's my 50. So let's get back to, you've been talking about a lot of different statistics, which I love. Like your articles about stats, I'm just like, I eat it up. And one of the things that you noted in your articles was how perfect and typical use, you were talking about perfect use, but perfect and typical use are numbers that are made to be compared. Yes. And the thing that I just found so fascinating was you noted that if there is a large discrepancy between perfect and typical use, that means that and I forget your exact wording, but it was, I'm quoting your article to you right now. Does that feel weird? But you said that there's a large discrepancy between those numbers, and it means that it was difficult to implement. And the birth control pill is 99.7% perfect use, 91% typical use.
Yes.
You do not see, and condoms are 98% perfect, 85% typical. You do not see that large of a discrepancy with any fertility awareness method. It's pretty close, like within 3 to 4 points or less.
Sometimes. Yes.
Sometimes. Depending on the study and depending on where it was conducted. So let's dig into that, because fertility awareness stats are tricky and they're messy. They're not, because in statistical terms, the studies are not conducted with a truly random sample, which means that the results of the study cannot be applied to the general population. They can be applied to people who meet the criteria of the study. But within that, there are 2 key factors that can remove the effects of certain variables, like, your social, economic, or national feelings towards children, your religious, whether you're religious or not. There's so many factors, but the 2 key factors that can sort of minimize that are finding the right method for you and finding an instructor who is a good fit. So as an instructor, and I mean, I certainly have a lot of thoughts on this as somebody who has used 3 different methods and had 2 surprise children myself. Can you talk about, because this is a touchy subject for women, women don't know, hey, if a method is not working for you, you can change. If an instructor is not a good fit for you, if they're not getting back in touch with you, I don't care how nice they are, you can find a new instructor. I talk to women and they're like, but they're so nice. They're just trying to like take care of their families. And I was like, great. That is your instructor doing what she needs to do. But that also means that you're not getting the information that you need, which means you have every right to go find a new instructor. But can you talk about, and I'm like, I know that we're all about red flags right now and like the meme going around, but maybe by the time this episode airs, that'll be gone. Oh, well, people will remember. What are the red flags that women should look for that would indicate that they need to look for either a new method or a new instructor? And kind of as a tag on to that question, sometimes it is easier to just find a new instructor. A lot of people think switch methods because it's not working all around. Sometimes it is better to just switch instructors. Can you talk through like what women should be thinking about and what they should be aware of?
Yeah, so in regards to NFP method red flags, there is no NFP method that's a perfect fit for everyone in this world. So like if you're frustrated with your NFP method, I think it's worth it to try a different one. But the red flags would be if you're confused. Like, I hope you have an instructor, you learn the method through your instructor, but if you're still confused about what's happening, even after you've asked your instructor for clarification, you could have like the best instructor in the world. But if your mucus is confusing, or if you're just like not seeing a temperature shift and you're like, now what? Then it's not a good fit. You're going to be abstaining forever, or you're going to be taking risks without realizing that you're taking risks, right? And so if you have any confusion about your method that you're just like not able to clear up, even after touching base with your instructor, that's a red flag. And uncertainty. Lots of couples have learned like, here is how you do the method, and they really understand here is how you do the method, but they just like, it just is not clicking. They just like don't know. And sometimes I find it's more of a psychological issue than a physiological issue. Like, you are having textbook mucus, but you're just like really scared to get it wrong. And so if you're not feeling confident with your method, I think it's worth it to explore a different method. If you've had a surprise pregnancy with the method, I don't think that's necessarily a red flag. Nothing in this world is 100% effective. But if you've had a surprise pregnancy with the method that can't be explained by the method or can't be explained by your instructor, then I think it's worth it to get a second opinion on what happened, and to see if maybe after this baby's born, maybe if there's a better fit in terms of fertility tracking, or a better fit in terms of an instructor. Sometimes you just need a different instructor, right? And
Can
then
I pause you right there? Because I want to just kind of circle back on something you were touching on with, the difficulty of the method. I think a lot of people think, well, I should be able to figure this out. I should be able to just buckle down and learn the method. And it's like, no, like you said, if despite sufficient instruction, you're still not getting it, stop. It's not something you need to push through. And I know for Catholics especially, this is a tendency. It's like, well, I should just suffer through this. And it's like, no. No, this is not something that you need to or should suffer through. I was reading Interior Freedom, and Father Jacques Philippe, he talks about, he's like, any suffering that you can end, you should. If you have a headache, you take Tylenol. If your fertility awareness method is driving you nuts, find a new one. Right? Yeah. Like, it's not about, like, suffering is not an ideal. And I know we can kind of idealize it especially in Catholic and Christian circles. It's not the ideal. It's not a preferable state.
This is what I tell my marriage prep couples is like, God created the world. He created science. He created fertility. He made men fertile at all times. Women have cyclical fertility. You are only fertile for one day in your whole cycle, 24 hours. God planned it that way. And so we understand the science. Just take advantage of it, right? It's not a guessing game. NFP should never be a guessing game. You should know what's going on in your body. It doesn't matter which method you're using. You should feel really confident saying, okay, I'm in the pre-ovulatory time. I haven't ovulated yet. Okay, I've ovulated. We're waiting till the egg's no longer viable for pregnancy. There should not be gray areas in your NFP journey. And if there is, that's a problem. It's a problem for me anyways. It's a problem. I think it needs to be addressed. And the science exists to address it. So why wouldn't you just tap into that?
Yeah, I love that. And I want to circle back a little bit more back to the instructor's role, because as we were talking about before, and like y'all are both explaining, method could be a great fit for someone, but if it's not a good instructor fit for the individual person, it really doesn't matter that much, because the
Yeah.
client needs to be able to understand how to put that method into practice. So just a couple of other potential red flags I was thinking of is like, if you have a question for your instructor and your instructor doesn't have an answer and they just leave it there, like there's always a supervisor, there's always a colleague. That instructor should be trying to find answers for you and not just leaving questions on the table for you to get confused, putting this into practice. And the other thing is, you mentioned surprise pregnancies. If there are multiple surprise pregnancies and the instructor has not recommended another method, I think like the instructors should have at least a basic understanding of all the methods to where they can, the instructor is not there for themselves. They're there for the woman and her best interests. And there's a lot of times an instructor can recognize when the method they're teaching is not a good fit, but ultimately it's up to the woman. I've been very confused. There's a couple of clients of mine that I'm like, it just does not seem like Creighton is a good fit. There's 2 clients and I'm like, I've recommended another method to them multiple times. They've surprised me because for whatever reason, they like it. But we don't know that until we bring it up and we share resources with them. If we don't know enough, we can point them in the direction of, look, this is you. Now you have all the knowledge, the information, make the best decision for yourself.
Yeah,
I think
it's
that's
all about
important.
informed consent,
Yeah.
right? Like you need to know all of the options so that you can make a good decision for your family. And like, I'm a nurse, so I just, do all the nursey things, but like informed consent is a really big thing. If you're in the hospital, the doctor or the nurse needs to explain to you what they're doing, what might happen, and how it's going to benefit you or how it might harm you. And so I feel like it's the same thing with NFP. This is your body, this is your fertility, this is your life. It's a really big deal. And so if you have an instructor who either can't explain things in a way that you understand, or if you have an instructor who doesn't know the answers, that's like a really, really big issue.
For sure. Now that we're getting into all the complicated, juicy details, what about, there are some women who have cycles that are harder to manage or harder to chart. The other day when we were speaking with you, Louise, you gave us a really good example, or you just explained PCOS and what's actually like going on in a woman who has PCOS. Could you break that down for us real quick?
Sure. This is the nerdy side of Louise.
And if you could, because you did it we love nerdy Louise. But you did it, when you did it in the and one of this was I thought was interesting is that it's in the context of, in this context, you were saying that, when there is this need to avoid pregnancy, there's this need to understand your body first and foremost. And that was whenever we had this conversation the other day, that was when you started to get into PCOS and the explanation of it. And that once you do understand what is happening, you can understand why there are long cycles and so on. So anyway, I just wanted to tee that up a little bit more, because I think that that's important context, is that irregular cycles are going to make abstinence and staying out of that 2% that much more difficult. And so understanding your body is that much more important. So, okay.
So with PCOS, with like any underlying hormone imbalances, it's really important to understand what's actually happening in your body. Lots of couples who have underlying hormone imbalances have really serious reasons for avoiding pregnancy because they're at a higher risk for miscarriage. And so they have this really strong desire to avoid pregnancy sometimes. And I think it's important to understand what's happening in your body, because as an NFP instructor, we don't just try and teach couples how to abstain for like 90 days in a row. That's not sustainable. So if you're having cycles that are 90 days long, we need to figure out what's going on and how can we fix it. And that's true with all of the methods. There's no method that's okay with you having a 90-day cycle. And so what's happening in PCOS is this kind of goes back to like the basic physiology of fertility. So if your listeners don't have a good understanding of that, then this is going to be a little bit over your head, but you can just rewind and listen again. So what happens in a normal healthy cycle is at the beginning of the cycle, all of the hormone levels are relatively low. And the first hormone that makes a blip on the radar is follicle stimulating hormone. Follicle stimulating hormone is released by the brain. It stimulates a follicle to develop an egg. So the follicle is in the ovary, it's holding onto the egg starts to develop. As the egg develops, it gets bigger and bigger. When the egg gets bigger, the follicle stretches to accommodate the egg. And when the follicle stretches, it releases estrogen. So when you're tracking NFP, estrogen is like the hormone. Every method tracks estrogen. Mucus is a symptom of estrogen. With the clear blue monitor, when you're getting highs, that means your estrogen levels are rising. So when your estrogen levels are really high, that tells your body that your egg is fully developed and it's ready to ovulate. And so your brain will release luteinizing hormone, and luteinizing hormone will happen in a really quick surge. It'll break through the follicle, ovulation will happen. With a woman with PCOS, if she has cysts on her ovaries, those cysts they grow and they stretch, and it's a part of the ovarian tissue. So when ovarian tissue stretches, just like a follicle, it releases estrogen. So some women who have PCOS at the beginning of their cycle, not all of their hormone levels are relatively low. Their estrogen levels are relatively high, but it's not related to an egg. It's related to a cyst. And so at the beginning of the cycle, the brain doesn't get a message that your estrogen levels are low. It just gets a message that your estrogen levels are medium. And so it's not low enough to release follicle stimulating hormone, but it's not high enough to release luteinizing hormone. So the woman ends up sitting in this kind of like limbo where her body is just like medium estrogen levels, and the brain's like, okay, like which way are you going to go here? What do you want me to release? And so at some point the brain will just get impatient and it'll release follicle stimulating hormone, and then it'll start the ovarian process. So for a woman with PCOS, that's why they have those really long cycles with a really delayed ovulation, because their brain is trying to figure out what's next here. Their body isn't doing the things in an orderly fashion, and it gets very confusing for the brain. And so what is the solution with PCOS? We could do a whole podcast on PCOS. Maybe we should do that. But the solution is to bring down the estrogen levels so that the brain can release follicle stimulating hormone in an orderly fashion, or to increase the progesterone levels at the end of the cycle, which in turn helps to bring down the estrogen levels at the beginning of the cycle. And so it doesn't really matter which way you tackle it, which way your doctor tackles it. It's just a matter of getting those hormones in check so that your brain can do things in an orderly fashion.
Such a beautiful explanation of what so many people I know have questions about. But speaking of what you just described, it sounds like hormone levels can be kind of all over the place with someone who has PCOS. And I know PCOS can look a lot of different ways in a lot of different women. So because Marquette, one of the main indicators that Marquette used is that hormone level rise. I wonder, a lot of people wonder, like, how does Marquette fit in with the PCOS woman? Like, maybe there are some concerns. So can you speak to that as a Marquette instructor? How would you respond to a woman having those kinds of concerns? And just speak to that for us.
So a lot of the women that we teach do have PCOS. Probably like 20% of the women that are in my client list have PCOS. It's not that it's impossible. Marquette is really effective for women with PCOS, but it can be very frustrating because if you're having a 90-day cycle with Marquette, for the first 6 cycles, we take a really conservative approach to the beginning of fertility while we get to know what your body's kind of up to. And so that's just like a boatload of abstinence. And so couples can be really frustrated with that. And like I said, we don't let them keep having 90-day cycles. If they're having really long cycles, that first 6 cycles that we're tracking with them, that's a really good time for them to go and see a doctor and start to get their hormones balanced, because we're taking that conservative approach. Sometimes when you're balancing hormones, the woman will just like peak super early in her cycle because it did an efficient thing. So with Marquette, it's not impossible to track with PCOS. It can be frustrating. It can be frustrating with all of the methods, right? And some women with PCOS have like constant mucus that just like is weird and it doesn't make sense. Some women report having what seems like constant peak type mucus. And that's just because her estrogen levels are high, and mucus is a symptom of estrogen. And so some women will find that Creighton's a good option for them with PCOS. Someone will prefer Marquette. I think, again, it kind of boils down to like, what are you willing to sacrifice, right? Women who have those 90-day cycles with PCOS and they're doing Marquette, we help them to figure out what their hormone imbalances are, but like, it's a lot of abstinence as we're figuring it out. That's a really big sacrifice. If they do maybe Creighton or Billings, if they're having like kind of readable mucus, they might have way more available days in the preovulatory time than they would with Marquette, but they might not feel super confident with finding that peak. And so then it's, I don't know, it really boils down to what the couple needs, right? Do they need clarity, or do they need more available days?
And I love what you say, the goal, and Emily and I say this all the time, is the goal is to find the underlying cause, right? No matter what method you're using. So if it can be treated, and hopefully we have physicians who are trained, and no matter what method they're trained in reading, a lot of them will work with clients who if it's a NAPRA doctor, for example, a lot of them will work with Marquette users and FEM doctors as well, and I think that will help to manage the charting aspect as well.
Another interesting thing on that topic is like the things that a doctor would do to help balance hormones. It's like well within the scope of practice of just like a general family doctor. If you go to your doctor and you say like, I think my progesterone levels are low. I know this because my luteal phase is only 8 days long and I'm having like a 7-day period with lots and lots of clotting and lots of cramps. It would be really reckless for your doctor to be like, you're crazy. So sometimes what happens when a woman is having wacky cycle stuff, they go to their doctor and they say like, my cycles are crazy. Like I'm having such heavy periods. And their doctor's like, oh, here you go, the pill, or here you go, an IUD. But if you come to your doctor with like a legitimate concern saying like, I think that this is what's wrong, as evidenced by XYZ, they have to take it seriously. And if they don't know what you're talking about, it's their responsibility to figure out what you're talking about. And the research exists. It's published research, right? And so even if women don't have a NAPRO doctor or an NFP doctor in their area, if they know that they have cycle problems, they can ask their NFP instructor, like, can you just write down like what you think is happening? What are you seeing in my chart? And what would you recommend be done about it? And we can do that. Like, I wouldn't be able to say progesterone, 200 milligrams, BID or whatever, but I can say like the luteal phase is short as evidenced by this, and this justifies a progesterone blood draw, or this justifies like a cycle follow through. And if they don't know what we're talking about, they'll refer you to an endocrinologist, because the reproductive system is a part of the endocrine system, and it's part of your body.
Mm-hmm. That's so important, because I know a lot of women are wondering, as you hear that you can use this information to become healthy, where do I go? I don't have an NAPRO doctor in my area. So I'm so grateful that you said that, because that's such a valuable piece for women to know, to help them advocate for themselves, because there's no textbook manual how to sit down with your doctor that looks at you like you're a nut because you do fertility awareness and you're not on the pill. And like, how do you talk to them about, I know my body, I know what I need these tests, let's do this. So I love that. And I also loved what you noted, the needs of the couple and the effect that has on method choice. Whether, you are okay with that abstinence, or if you do need more available days. I'm so grateful that you said that, because that is a factor. And I know that there can be an emphasis on, well, again, kind of going back to what we were talking about before, that, well, it's all about sacrifice. You just got to sacrifice. It's like, well, maybe not. And if not, don't. Like, it's not, again, like suffering and sacrifice is not the ideal. If it is like hurting your marriage and you could have more usable days with another method, make the switch. Like, it's good. And I know, as like a fertility awareness coach, like I meet women in such a different space where they're dealing with the repercussions of everything that we've been talking about and the effects on their relationships. And it is such a huge issue of, how do I navigate? I'm trying to learn my body. I'm trying to do the right thing here. We can't get pregnant, but also there is this reality of, we're married and we want to have sex. And it does nobody any good to sweep that under the rug. It is a very important part of marriage for Catholics and for Christians.
Yeah.
Married people are the only people who get to have sex in a moral sense. So it's a very big deal. And it's, so I really appreciate you touching on that. But I want to go ahead and wrap this up. As like we could keep talking for hours, like you said, if PCOS, if you're volunteering to come back and just talk about PCOS, we might be hitting you up.
Sure.
But I wanted to just close this out. We're having all of our guests close out with just giving us your elevator pitch for fertility awareness. If you were on an elevator ride, what would you tell the people about fertility awareness?
Oh, that's a tough one. So how about if you're at an airport and someone asks you about fertility awareness? This actually happened to me.
Okay, you're in a TSA line. All right, now go.
Yeah, that's what happened. So I was in
TSA line at Christmas. There we go.
I was in line trying to get back into Canada. And what is your reason for traveling? Oh, I was at a conference. What kind of a conference were you at? It's complicated. So I was like, I was at a fertility awareness conference. I'm a fertility educator. No more questions from that security agent. They flew me through, not a problem. They did not have any follow-up questions for me. But as I was running to catch my plane, a guy was chasing after me and he's like, excuse my mess. And I thought maybe I had cut him off in line or something. I thought he was mad and I was just like, I can't deal with this. So I kept running and he caught up to me and he's like, excuse me, are you a fertility educator? I was like, yes, I am. And he said, my wife and I have been trying to get pregnant for 2.5 years and we really need help. Can you help me? And so then I was like, well, I don't know. It's complicated. I'm a nurse in Alberta because we were in Vancouver, which is a different part of Canada. So I was like, I'm a nurse in Alberta. So I probably can help you. If you come to Alberta, I can help you for sure. I can refer you to an Alberta doctor if we can't figure out what's going on. And he said, oh, I'm from Edmonton. I was like, me too. So anyways, we talked about NFP. We talked about the value of fertility awareness. And so on their side of things, they had been trying, they still are trying to get pregnant. They had tried IVF 3 times. They're not Catholic. They had tried IVF 3 times. They had paid $5,000 to someone in the doctor's office to teach them how to track their mucus. And I was just screaming inside because you never should have to pay $5,000 to learn NFP. And so we had a really good conversation about the value of tracking cycles, the value of having those cycles tracked on paper so that we can see what's going on in your body, what's the issue, what are the imbalances, how can we fix it? Generally, when you're tracking things like that, if you see an imbalance, it's not a hard fix. It's not generally a difficult issue to address. It's just a little hormone imbalance. Sometimes it's supplements, sometimes it's medication that you need, but you're not generally doomed to have crazy cycles for the rest of your life. And so as a nurse, my elevator pitch for fertility awareness is just know what your body is doing. Is trying to talk to you. The medical world sees the reproductive cycles as the 5th vital sign. And it really, so many couples we've been able to help them identify underlying thyroid disorders, PCOS, endometriosis, fibroids. If you're feeling not yourself, or if you're feeling not well, your cycle will be able to tell you a lot about what's actually going on. And so there's the Catholic side of NFP. It makes your marriage better. It helps you grow in virtue. That's all really good. And I do believe that as well. But I just think fertility awareness is so valuable because it helps you figure out what's going on in your body. And if there's something that needs to be addressed, it helps people address it quickly.
Just basic good information. So listen up, folks. When you are in line at the airport and you're feeling awkward, just tell people you're into fertility awareness. You never know what's going to happen.
You'll make a friend.
Also, if you want the person next to you to not talk to you, just tell them that you're a fertility awareness instructor and they'll quickly shut up.
He actually did that. And it was some random guy. And I told him that I started a fertility awareness nonprofit. And I was just like you, I was kind of I don't really want to talk about this because I know you're going to be weirded out. Yeah. But he was like, that's really cool. And I was
on the way to visit me, wasn't it?
It was. He was like, why are you traveling? And I was like, well, he's like, is it business or pleasure? I was like, it's sort of business, but I don't really want to go into it.
Oh my gosh. Okay.
But
So
I
every
did, and
once
it
in a
was
while,
very,
there will be the rando who is interested, and that's a good thing. It's a beautiful
you never
thing.
know. You never know.
You never
Exactly.
know. Well, anyway, Louise, thank you so much for joining Emily and I and all of our guests today. Everything you said was so interesting and so helpful. I know a lot of people will really appreciate it. So we can't wait to have you back on one day. And you guys, listeners, thank you so much for joining us today. If you want to learn more about Louise and her work, please check out our show notes. And we'll also have some information on where you can find her on social media, etc. And if you liked what you heard today, please go ahead and subscribe to our channel. Leave us a review if possible. That will help more people to find our content. And as always, you can find us on Facebook and Instagram at FABM. That's FABMBASE. And of course, don't forget to check out our website, FABMBASE.org, where you can contact us there as well. We hope you guys have a great day. And until next time, have a good one.